Good evening, everyone. My name is Ron Simon. I'm curator of television and radio out in New York, and it's great to be in Los Angeles. I'd like to welcome you to the Paley Center for Media and our very special event on how television and the medical community have worked together to inform and potentially transform this nation's and global national health. Tonight, we have convened an expert panel with our partners, the Global Media Center for Social Impact at the UCLA Fielding School, and we will discuss how scripted storylines have contributed to our knowledge of public health. And we're very pleased to thank the Open Society Foundations for making this evening possible. We have worked with Open Society in New York. We did a panel on looking at health and news, and it's great to come out to Los Angeles to turn our lens now into entertainment and medical issues. And we certainly have a fantastic panel. We have three writers who have created memorable storylines that involve medical issues. We have two of the most distinguished writers who are also doctors working in primetime industry today, Dr. Zoanne Clack and Dr. Neal Baer. We also have the writer nominated for an Academy Award for her screenplay on Dallas Buyers Club, Melisa Wallack. And we'll meet our writers very soon. We're also going to be looking at contemporary issues that writers in the medical community should be concerned with, one of them being the cost of medicine and the access to medicine. We have an expert with us who will explore those issues, Els Torreele of the Open Society Public Health Program. And the great thing about our evening tonight is that we have so many people in the audience who are working on shows, who have thought about this issue for a long time and really want to include you in the discussion. So we invite you to talk and make this a participatory, interactive dialogue. The television drama has certainly been one of the most responsible genres in television history. The very first medical show was Medic, which broke through in 1954. And they dramatized cases from the Los Angeles County Medical Association, often shot in real hospitals with real doctors. Doctors were great. Sometimes they smoked on the screen, not giving the best advice that way, but things improved. And since then, shows utilize the knowledge of medical advisors and innovative research centers like Global Media Impact to enlighten their audience about health issues of the day. And certainly today, there are daunting issues facing us. A Pew Center study found that almost half the population now suffer from some type of chronic disease. And these chronic diseases lasting 3 months or more now account for 75% of our health care costs. Our costs are the highest in the world. And we read about some medical drugs that could help out with such chronic conditions as hepatitis C or cancer, but we'll learn tonight those drugs come at a very high price. But these are statistics, numbers that I'm talking about, and it's really scripted drama that people respond to. Numbers don't really motivate action. But we've found that identification with television characters and having the issues illuminated in a dramatic setting have done wonders for people's understanding of the health system. And tonight we'll look at how our writers are crafting medical storylines on multiple platforms. We'll also look at how you measure the impact of these storylines and using the most contemporary metrics. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. We'll begin with our expert, Els Torreele. She is Director of Access of Essential Medicine Initiative for Open Society Public Health Program. She is trained as a bioengineer, also receiving a doctorate in applied biological sciences from the Free University, Brussels. Els previously worked with Doctors Without Borders, where she worked in devising treatments for diseases in developing countries. Please welcome Els Torreele. Now, the first of our three writers, and Melisa Wallack is the co-writer of the acclaimed Dallas Buyers Club, a project that took many years to produce. She and her partner, Craig Borton, were nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay and for a Writers Guild Award. She is currently developing a medical series, which we'll talk about a little later. Please welcome Melisa Wallack. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Neal Baer, who's an award-winning writer-producer, who's also a pediatrician, graduated from Harvard Medical School. He's utilized his medical expertise as a writer and showrunner for NBC's Law & Order, Special Victims Unit, and ER, for which he received multiple Emmy nominations. Neal serves on the boards of many healthcare organizations and is also project scientist for Global Media Center for Social Impact. Currently, he is executive producer of the hit series Under the Dome, and he's working on many other projects. Please welcome Dr. Neal Baer. And our final panelist is Dr. Zoanne Clack, is a writer and executive producer of the award-winning ABC series Grey's Anatomy, where she also serves as medical advisor. She graduated from the University of Texas Southwestern with a medical degree and spent a year with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Zoanne has received numerous awards, including a Writers Guild Award for Best New Series and the Scroll of Merit Award, the highest honor given by African-American physicians in the country. She serves on many boards that look at health through entertainment. Please welcome Zoanne Clack. And we're going to look at two breakthrough storylines, but before we do, I'd like to ask our writers, is there a way that you approach scripted drama dealing with medical issues? Are there some principles that you sort of follow when you know that you're crafting a really good storyline?
On our show, it's how it will inform the characters. Mm-hmm. We're all very character-based on Grey's Anatomy, if anyone follows the show. So it's about how the patient will affect the character, or how the medical disease will affect the character, or how the treatment will affect the character. So it's all very intertwined, and often people tell me that there's not that much medicine on Grey's Anatomy, which I slave to do, like every episode. But I think that we intertwine it so much that you just don't feel it as much as a separate part of the show, because it's so much a part of how we transform the show. And we either start with a case or we start with the character, and then we try to make those two mesh together seamlessly, hopefully, so that it's not a preaching kind of situation. It's very much you're learning with the characters, and hopefully we'll take that message with you.
Neal?
So on ER, for example, we would really try to find the trenchant social issues of those times, be it access to pharmaceuticals for the elderly, or how to treat HIV before the triple cocktail was developed. And then we used the strands of the drama really through our characters, as Zoanne was saying, who have different perspectives and points of view to really kind of discuss and argue over the ethics of the case, and that's how you find out what that character is made of. So we're always, again, looking at what the conflict is, because there's so much conflict in medicine, and what is known, what's not known, what people think, what people don't think, what they believe, and that's mixed up with all of our own personal beliefs, our religious beliefs, our political beliefs, and it was a really great stew for getting at, some issues that were really being talked about a lot, and maybe not, though, talked about a lot on television. So when we would do shows about access to abortion, or access to antiretrovirals, or transgender issues, or whatever it was that was really sort of percolating at that time, we could have our characters who had very different perspectives fight it out, and that was always really fun.
And Melisa, when you were approaching Dallas Buyers Club, which was so long in gestation, could you just talk about how you did the research for the project?
Yeah, really, I don't come from a medical background, so for me it was much more just trying to figure out, and there was limited information about what had actually happened with Ron, even though my writing partner had met with him for several days. So really, we knew we had the initial story just started with Ron was importing these drugs, and then we got to, through LexisNexis search, that he had sued this hospital for AZT. And so then once we had kind of cracked open that peptide T, AZT situation of his, then that's when we just kind of started thinking, okay, this is our jumping off point. This is a huge issue. No one knows these things. I don't know anything about AZT. And so then we just researched for 6 months AZT and peptide T and what was happening at the time in that time period, because I was not at all familiar with what was happening with AIDS specifically. I mean, obviously I knew generally in the press what people had spoken about, but which was much different than what was actually happening. So I think in any movie you just have to go and research, research, research.
Now we're going to take a look at 2 breakthrough storylines in television. And we're going to start with ER in 2000, where, Neal, you showed the link of HPV and cervical cancer. And this storyline is important just in television, but it was also studied by the Kaiser Family Foundation and really had an impact on the viewer's consciousness.
I read a piece about high school sex parties in North Carolina, and that was the impetus for this story, and how young women were getting cervical cancer because they were young and their cervices were not developed enough to really fight the human papillomavirus or withstand the results of it, and so they went through the stages of cancer very quickly. So that story, I read it in, I think, maybe the Washington Post, and so that became the impetus for the show. And what was interesting is we really wanted to know, did our show have an impact and an effect on people? Because there had never been a study before that looked at the effect of a television series on knowledge acquisition. It had all been retrospective studies where there was research and they'd ask people, do you remember seeing something on a show? So this was actually the first experimental study where we surveyed a huge random sample of viewers the week before the show aired, and I think 19% knew that HPV causes cervical cancer. Human papillomavirus is the cause of cervical cancer. The experiment was the show. It aired. We did not tell people to watch it. They did, or as they typically were used to doing back then, when you could get 45 share and 40 million viewers, which will never, I'm glad I lived through that, because that will never happen again. And then we resurveyed viewers a week later, and 60% knew that HPV caused cervical cancer, and it wasn't because they learned it from anywhere else, it was the show. And we also, learned that 1 in 7 people actually contacted their physician at some time after seeing the show, or they, over a third shared information with someone else. So that really gave us pause on our show, that we wanted to be as accurate as possible, and that we really had a power that we, weren't sure we wanted to have, but we did have, to influence opinion about health issues. So we tried to be as accurate as possible, and that's when Hollywood Health and Society was just about starting too, and that was where, as Sandra, who's here, Sandra DeCastro-Buffington, who ran it for 6 years, we would give information about health issues to writers because we knew that the public was seeing a show, and even though it was entertainment or it was make-believe or whatever, they really believed that George Clooney was a pediatrician. And so, we felt it was incumbent on ourselves to be as accurate as possible, because we didn't want people to take things that were being said that were inaccurate and actually try to live by them. And so this was the first experimental study that proved that, like it or not, people do learn what we put on TV. And
Zoanne, you also showed the power of television in a Grey's Anatomy storyline in 2005, where you illuminated the breast cancer gene mutation, BRCA.
Basically, as he was talking about Hollywood Health and Society, they do panels that will come around to the shows and talk about relevant societal issues and public health issues. And the issue of the year, apparently, was BRCA, because both ER and Grey's Anatomy did BRCA storylines that year. And because of the stuff that they told us, I mean, the drama is just inherent in the disease. You can't go wrong with this. There's conflict. There's dramatic pauses built in to the actual mutation. So, and it was at the forefront of genetic mapping. It was one of the things that you could do something about. And there was, as Neal was saying earlier, there were chances for each of our characters to have an opinion about what the patient should do, and then have conflict in and of themselves as the characters in their personal lives, because I don't know if you know, Addison was the wife of Derek, who was having an affair with Meredith, and that provided more conflict based on what these patients were going through and based on their relationship. So it just was like adding drama upon drama upon drama with a real, accurate medical story, and we could tell something and be responsible and show all sides of the issues. So it was just a kind of a no-brainer to do that
And it
story.
really inspired the audience to do their own research into the BRCA.
Right, and you have the results of the, because they did a study on that too also, right?
Right, yes. And it's also interesting that they did a study when Angelina Jolie talked about her struggle with BRCA, and that did not inspire the audience to do research. In fact, they saw that as more or less her own personal health narrative. So it's interesting that a real-life subject did not, but your characters did have that impetus for knowledge.
Yeah, that was amazing when you told me that.
Yes, Neal, yeah.
You know, in some ways I don't find that surprising because I think, I don't know, it's probably a multitude of reasons, but like one, I think there might be some celebrity burnout. You know, we're so used to now with the internet and transmedia seeing celebrities, you know, appended to everything. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is, you know, we love their characters, I think. And so, you know, we're inspired by the people they play. And so I think there's something about, you get so involved week after week with Grey's Anatomy and the characters, or when you're watching ER, that you're connected to them or to the characters in your film, that it's very different from a movie star. And that you kind of like, you know, you welcome them in your home, or now that movies are so accessible on Netflix or Amazon or whatever, that you feel like a connection to them because they seem like real people when they're playing the parts. And I think that kind of connection isn't as kind of scary as the real person connection, possibly. So there's probably a lot of reasons, but I'm not really surprised by that.
And one of our major themes tonight is access to medicine, and certainly, Melissa, that's, you know, the heart and soul of your script for Dallas Buyers Club.
Yeah, I mean, look, Ron's whole story was about access to medicine. I mean, that's initially how we started, was, in his question was, which he kind of, you know, posed to the court, was, do I have, and he believed he did, I have the, you know, my constitutional right is that I can put what I want into my body. And the court ruled that actually you do not have the constitutional right to put what you want in your body. So that was really the issue of the whole, that we wanted the whole movie about beyond AIDS, really with cancer as well, and every other kind of, specifically diseases that you are very, you know, terminal, that you have limited amount of time. Why can't you put what you want into your body? You know, why, when you're given 3 months to live, should it be up to any government agency to decide what course of action you take? I mean, it doesn't, you know, the court the judge in the movie says, and those are his words actually from the transcripts, it does not make sense. And the FDA is using bullying tactics to prevent access to these drugs. Peptide T, the drug that Ron Woodruff wanted to get, that he believed for his own personal use, it staved off dementia, is actually in phase 3 trials right now, is going to be approved for that. And it's been over 20 years. So you can see that, and they crucified the people that had the patent on it. They tried to steal the patent. I mean, the things that the company went through to try and get this kind of non-toxic, completely non-toxic. They had never given enough of an amount of the peptide T to any single animal in trials for anything to happen, any adverse effect, except for a rash, like a very small rash some people ended up having in the phase 2 trials. So you can see that, you know, the whole thing is just incredibly disturbing. Like, why should we not have access? If I think grape juice is going to help me and I'm given 8 weeks to live, like, go for it. In my opinion.
Els, you've thought about deeply about access to medicine and the price of drugs. Can you talk about where we are right now, and what do you think are some of the major issues that perhaps could be integrated into storylines?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to hear from you the issue of, like, access about what you want to put into your body, but I mean, for HIV/AIDS, there was also the issue of the price of the medicine, which was already mentioned. And we work in many other countries, and the price of the medicine is really a major barrier today for a lot of people that would love to access this life-saving medicine, but they just cannot afford it because in many countries there is no such thing as a health insurance that pays actually the bulk of the price of a medicine. And also, we heard in the clip earlier that when AZT came onto the market, $10,000 per year was supposedly the most expensive drug ever. Today, this is not even considered expensive anymore. The prices have gone up exponentially, arbitrarily, I would say. And for instance, today, to name the other big epidemic that we're confronting today, hepatitis C, there was a treatment available that was not all that good, but that was roughly $15,000 to $20,000. And today there is a new drug that came onto the market, I think in December, and is being sold at $84,000 for a 12-week treatment. It's $1,000 per pill. I mean, it's more expensive than gold. And this is now becoming the major barrier. And this used to be a problem of the poorer people in poor countries. But today, the same is happening in the US, in Europe. No one can afford these type of high prices of medicines. And there are many stories today of people that actually are dying because actually the medicine that can save their life is out there, but they can't afford it.
I'd like to know from our writers, have you dealt with the cost? I know that you have, but is it more difficult when you're dealing with the cost of drugs as opposed to the personal struggle of an individual with a disease?
We dealt with it a lot on ER from orphan drugs. So for like Gaucher's disease costs $100 and something, I think, $1,000 a year. And why is that? Or certain kinds of genetic tests are available in some states. We did a show, and not in others. So if you know your kid has MCAD, a metabolic disease, then you know to give your kid sugar water when they get sick. But if you live in a state that didn't do the genetic testing, then you wouldn't know, and your kid could go into have terrible seizures and die. So it was, you know, always these issues of social justice and inequality that, as Zoanne was saying, too, make for great stories. We do some work at our center now, in the Global Media Center for Social Impact. We're really interested in access to antiretrovirals in Africa. So we're interested in innovative financing. So when I talk about this in the United States, no one's heard about the tax unless you've actually heard about it in Europe. But in Europe, every airline ticket is taxed, and it goes to what's called Unitaid. So if you go to the website powerinnumbers.org, you'll see about it. And so this money, 80% of kids who get antiretrovirals in Africa get them through this tax. And what happens is the medication used to be, and we tell the story in a little animated film that we did with Mariska Hargitay and Chris Maloney from SVU. And so what happens is when you buy a ticket in Europe, that money used to go to a company in India that would make generic drugs, generic antiretrovirals, but then they signed an international agreement not to break the patent because they were making these drugs at cost. So then a couple of companies, Gilead, SmithKline, Glaxo, and Bristol Squibb Myers, did what's called the patent pool. So they put their patents into a pool for Africa and for Asia too, and they made their drugs available at cost. And then they get royalties from the tax on airline tickets. But when we went to the Bush and Obama administration and we showed our little films about this, they said that they would never put a tax, a $1 tax on airline tickets in the United States. So what do? We try to tell that story through our shows, or now through Transmedia, through YouTube, and through animated films that we do, to tell the story about innovative financing, because, as you were saying, they don't have the infrastructure in Tanzania to make these drugs. And so they're reliant on the United States and Europe for these drugs. And is it fair that people are dying in countries because they just don't have the money to pay for them? And this is a question that's been going on since the AIDS epidemic, since Clinton's administration, when he refused to make the drugs available to people in Africa. So this has been a real trenchant issue, and we have to just, as you were saying, and what your film did so well, just to, even though it was so many years ago, it's still happening now, to tell this story so that people are aware and they can lobby for innovative financing. And that's what stories can do, is they can really like make you motivated, or when they see your movie, they're like motivated, like, wow, this isn't really fair. It happened here once, you know, some years ago, but is it fair that it should still be happening? And that's what the power, I hope, our shows and our movies can do.
Zoanne?
I just got some good pitches for season 11, I think. We actually don't show a lot of access to, not access to care, but like specific drug protocols and stuff, because we're such a surgical show. It's like, well, what's the surgery for it? But we do a lot of insurance issues. As you saw in the clip from earlier, you know, just how much is this going to cost? We just recently had, we were very proud of ourselves, actually. We just recently had this one case of this very rare thing called fetus in fetu, which really is, it's very rare that it occurs, and it's mostly will be found, especially in America, in like a baby. So, of course, we wanted a 30-year-old to present with it. So how did we get around the issue of why is he not taking care of this so far? Because he didn't have insurance, and now Obamacare has kicked in. So we were able to like kind of just drop that in. And that's why he's now coming out and seeking care, and then turned into a whole different story. But you know, we usually will just try to focus on more of like access to care, and we can't take care of this because of like how much is this going to cost. But on Grey's, unfortunately, we live in this kind of bubble where they have lots of money all the time.
Els, did you want to say?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing that is happening today in the US as well, and in many other countries, is actually to make the distinction between, well, two things. The prices of medicines have never been as high, and there is no logical explanation for that. It's just pharmaceutical companies charge whatever they can get away with. And I think the question is no longer who's going to pay for it or how we're going to finance it. The real question today is, why are these medicines so expensive? And this is the question that is not often asked. And I think that this is really where we need to go, because I mean, ultimately, whether it's health insurance, public, private, or Medicare, paying for it, it's our money. It's our taxpayers' money, our money that the insurance is, that goes to the insurance. And I think that has not really been highlighted a lot. The other thing the other point I want to make is that there is this very carefully constructed confusion between cost and price. I mean, the cost of medicines is actually dirt cheap. It costs almost nothing, and we know it's from the generic antiretroviral drugs. It costs less than $100 per year for a whole year treatment of triple therapy with generic AIDS medicines. That is what the chemical manufacturer costs. And of course, we want drug companies to make some profit, and they need to pay for the innovation. That's all fine. But from there to go to $84,000, that is a really big jump. And that's what we see today, that actually there is a confusion between what it really costs and the price. And there is a confusion in the terminology, because if you think that you can talk about the cost of this treatment is $84,000, people seem to feel like, there is something inherent about it. There is something justifiable. There is some value in it that justifies $84,000. And that is a carefully constructed narrative that I personally would love to see somehow busted by what all of you are doing, because this is really essential, the difference between it costs actually $200 and you demand $84,000. Why is that?
It's a tricky narrative when you talked about innovation. So, you know, the former head of the New England Journal, Marcia Angel, has written a lot on this subject. And so when you said innovation, she would argue that there's really not much innovation going on in drug companies. They're not making new antibiotics. Birch Bayh and Robert Dole years ago made it, passed a law. They put a law through so that drug companies could easily access research that was being paid for by taxpayers through universities. And so, a huge proportion of their costs really are what? Advertising and television. And so, this is, interesting, and it would be quite controversial to do, but certainly, one should be able to do that. The only time we ever were censored ever on ER was once, and it had to do with drugs, because Tylenol is a very potent drug that, if you read the label now, and they've changed the label over the years, a lot of young people will overdose with Tylenol thinking it's benign and, I'll be okay, and it absolutely destroys your liver very quickly. And so we did an episode about a young woman who OD'd on Tylenol because she was pregnant, and it turned out she was pregnant by her brother. So the network was like, whoa, that's a triple threat: Tylenol, incest, and suicide attempt. And they came back and said, you can do the suicide attempt and the incest, but you can't say Tylenol. So Anthony Edwards said, oh, really? And so they said, well, you can say acetaminophen. And he said, I'll say Tylenol, and they bleeped it. And that was the only time that we were ever censored. But Tony said, I'm going to say the word. And we said, yeah, say it. But it was really, obviously Tylenol is advertised on, television. And so that's where you get into some issues about what maybe you can or can't do.
Well, I mentioned we have a really great audience, and I want to take a look now at how do we measure the impact of medical storylines. And we have a woman who's been the leader in doing this, and she's been doing it for many years, and now the founding director of the Global Media for Social Impact, Sandra DeCastro-Buffington. Sandra, would you just say something about storylines that have made an impact, and what are the metrics you're using now to look at them?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and this is a great panel. I loved listening to all of you. At the Global Media Center for Social Impact at UCLA, we measure the impact of storylines, primarily TV storylines, on viewers. And just to give a couple of examples, in the past there was a storyline on organ transplantation. And so here we're looking at a storyline motivating people to take action on behalf of someone else, not on their own behalf. And 10%, it was actually 10.3% of viewers who are not already organ donors signed up to become organ donors as a result of seeing a storyline on the show Numbers. So there's another one. We had a recent BRCA gene breast cancer storyline on 90210, and we did pre and post tests and saw that over 11% of viewers called their doctors to set up screening appointments as a result of seeing the show. So we know that these storylines can motivate viewers to take action. We do pre and post tests, so we measure baseline. As Neal was saying, what do people know? What are their attitudes? And what actions have they taken around a health topic before a story airs? And then within days after the story airs, we do a post test. And that's what allows us to measure the change. And as long as I've got the mic here, I'd like to say to all of you creative people in the audience, if you're working on a storyline that has to do with health, the environment, immigration, mass incarceration, LGBT, really any topic of social value, and you'd like an expert, we're a free resource to the industry. You can contact us, and we will connect you to the leading experts in the country.
Good to know. I'll just call you.
In terms of impact, do the writers then, when you do a storyline, do you gather to talk about this impact in the writer's room after the fact, not trying to? In Grey's Anatomy?
On Grey's Anatomy, we do not after the fact.
Right.
We are very concerned about it before the fact. So it's very much a topic of discussion, what our responsibility is to the public, how are we presenting the story, are we promoting this instead of, making it a faux pas. For instance, we haven't really been able to tackle a suicide story because we don't want to promote it, we don't want to make it look glamorous, and we haven't really figured out a way to really tackle it without doing that. And also anorexia, we haven't really been able to approach because we don't want to give people resources. And in order to make the story poignant, sometimes it's good to have those resources within it, so we just have stayed away from it. So maybe within the 15 years, like ER, if we have 15 years, we'll be able to crack those kinds of stories. But we're very, very cognizant of what's going to be put out there and what our responsibility is in that role.
And Neal, in your writing room, do you actually look at these statistics with your fellow writers?
We do on occasion. You know, the show I do now, we did some medical stories last year, and it's much more focused on environmental impact this year. So we're interested to see sort of what happens. But I do know Sandra didn't tell the story of ER and Atul Gawande going on in the last year to talk to them about the checklist manifesto, and he wrote a book about 7 simple things you can do in the OR to reduce morbidity and mortality by 47%. Like put antibiotics on board before you cut. Make sure you have the right patient name. Make sure you're cutting the right leg. You know, things. Introduce everybody. And so it aired. He went and he talked to the writers, and the impact was profound. Many hospitals around the country adopted the checklist. France adopted it, and it was after seeing the show. So I'm always interested in knowing, and I talked to Atul about it, and he said, you know, he writes for the New Yorker, he's written all these books, and he never had the impact that one night had on ER that really changed so much across the country. So we do look at, and I look at the work that Sandra publishes to see, you know, what kind of impact and how can we refine it. But it goes back to what Zoanne was saying. It's always about the story and the characters. I never think about entertaining or teaching. I just think about telling a really good story and all of its complexity.
Well, we've been talking mostly about scripted shows, but there is one reality show that's been shown to have a major impact the way that teenagers think about having babies, and that's 16 and Pregnant and Teen Mom. I'd like to introduce Lauren Dolgan. And Lauren, there have been studies that say this has had an impact on teenage pregnancy. Could you talk about that and how you choose characters for your series?
Well, I will say at first the show was a little controversial. People heard that title and were like, ew, disgusting. You know, when I came up with the idea, it was from an article that I had read about teenage pregnancies in the United States. It was like a knock in the gut. 750,000 girls get pregnant every year. And, you know, I have worked for MTV a long time, realized that is happening to my audience, if not to them, someone at their high school. So we developed the show, and we worked very closely in conjunction with the national campaign to prevent teen and unplanned pregnancy so that we could create the right messaging. The stories are impactful because they are peer-to-peer. It's not your parent or your teacher or your doctor telling you, don't get pregnant or don't have sex or have safe sex. The audience learned a lot from the show, which a university had done a study based on the show this year and noticed that there was hugely direct causes from watching the show to Google searches and searching about sexual health and the pregnancy rates going down. So it looks like 20,000 births per year we've reduced, which is pretty amazing for a little TV show. We cast stories of people who are able to share their very raw and unvarnished look at their very fragile time. So the girls are very brave to go through it, you know.
Well, the study is remarkable. People should take a look at it. Major, you know, a direct parallel. So also, MTV has been very successful in using other platforms, especially Transmedia, to get the message out. I'm just wondering how you guys have used different platforms to enhance the message that you hope will affect the viewer.
So on SVU, it really occurred to me, I did a little bit on ER where I would take a public health issue that day that day that the show aired, with maybe breast cancer awareness or kidney transplantation. I worked with Johns Hopkins and the Kaiser Family Foundation and NBC, and we made a little news piece. So they'd say, as you saw tonight, following ER, Noah, a little 10-second clip of Noah Wiley, and then they would do a news piece about that issue, and then they would make it available to all the NBC affiliates around the country at the 10 or 11 o'clock news. So it was a tie-in because I really wanted to promote the public health issues on my show. And that was really before the internet was available in ways that it is now. And so then by the time SVU was on, and we did a show about opening the backlog of rape kits. So there were over 450,000, I think, untested rape kits in the country where someone was sexually assaulted. They'd go through a 4 to 7 hour exam, and then nothing would happen, and the perp would be on the street. Often their DNA would be in the system because they'd committed various crimes in the past. And people were, women particularly, who were most often the victims, would be afraid to leave their homes because this person was out on the street. So, and I heard a real story about that. And so I did a show, and I took a 30-second clip, and I put it on a bubble tweet, which was available and no longer is, which was this little bouncing video. And then it would pop, and it would give you a link. And I partnered with Nick Kristof, who wrote that great piece about your show, and it got a lot of attention, which was wonderful. And he tweeted it out to his over 1 million followers in the Huffington Post. So we started making these kinds of collaborations with friends and opinion leaders and social advocates and story ambassadors, as we call them, so that we could get the story out there and we could give people actionable steps that they could take. So we listed ways that they could go to their chief of police or their city council members with clear ways of opening the backlog of rape kits, and they opened them all in Los Angeles. And Mariska Hargitay has taken this on as an issue and is doing a documentary about it, and it's really having success. So we're looking at how do you use Twitter, particularly how to use Instagram, how to use Facebook, how to use mobisodes, webisodes, how do you use texting, SMS, all of these different ways so that our shows, what I call, bridging the gap between inspiration and action, that if you're inspired by your show on MTV and you want to get some information rather than just going to Google, we could give you a link, or we can give you a little connection to somebody in your community, or et cetera, et cetera. Lots of ways to use transmedia now to get people right at the moment that they're inspired, so that time doesn't pass and they kind of forget about it, that we have instant ways of linking them. So it's a very exciting time using transmedia, new media, to connect people after they've been inspired, because our view is that what really inspires is seeing, Grey's Anatomy or seeing Dallas Buyers Club, and you really are excited, and now we can give you all kinds of ways to find out more. So it's a real exciting time, I think, for blending the traditional media of television or movies or music with all the things that are available now to us in the new media world.
I think Grey's Anatomy is actually going a little bit backwards, because we used to do a medical blog, like our medical researcher would pick one of the topics from the show and then write a blog about it and have a link at the bottom. And they have since told us we no longer do that. So for the last 2 years, we haven't done that. But I've actually recently pitched that we do some sort of Twitter type situation where the medical researcher and I, or either or both, can, in real time, like, answer questions about any kind of whatever medical issues, whatever we pick, hopefully, to just guide the audience. And so I had pitched that a couple of years ago and then forgotten about it. But now that the medical blog is gone, I think that we're going to try to revive that a little bit, so that because there's so much, in Shondaland, live tweeting has become the thing, the rage. During Scandal, it's like, if you follow any of the Scandal people, just do not turn on your Twitter during that time. And the Grey's Anatomy characters are kind of catching up. I mean, we're old school, pre-Twitter. I just recently kind of live tweeted a little bit my last episode, and I was like, oh, perhaps we can actually use this for good. So hopefully I can get something like that going for season 11.
We have the first transmedia producer at CBS now for our show Under the Dome. So I really pushed it because I was like, okay, so let's do this. So we have we're going to introduce a digital character who is actually tweeting with our characters when something opens up in the dome briefly, and the tweets get out, and then he's going to become a real character later on the show. So we've really like kind of embraced, because we have a huge young audience, you know, which is, you know, sort of new for CBS. So, so we're embracing transmedia, and then we can talk about dome conspiracies, and we can create fictive elements outside of our show, where if you just want to watch our show, that's great. But if you want to really get into some other issues and you want to like follow Hunter on houndsofdiana.com, which we've got that website, and it's like, I mean, I couldn't do it myself. That's why I have a full-time, Will Kendall's doing it, who's an expert in this, because I don't have time to do that, and it takes a full-time person. But I'm really so grateful to CBS that they're letting us kind of experiment and try, you know, putting out all these tweets by this character who doesn't really exist, but people will think they exist. And it's just it's another amazing time for television. So there's that using transmedia for sort of the non-fictive parts, which is how do you connect people to like your show, or, you know, about teen pregnancy or type 2 diabetes, and then how do you garner interest and give them more into the fictive world as well. So it's just up for grabs.
And we have in our audience producers that have used transmedia very creatively for East Los High, and they've created character blogs and a lot of other things. And I think we have Katie Elmore Moda here. And hi, Katie. Could you just talk about using transmedia and how medical issues do inform your series?
Sure. So that was obviously just a really short teaser trailer for the show, which is a show that takes place in East LA, featuring an all-Latino cast of Latino teens, but it's in English, one of the first shows to feature an all-Latino cast in English for young people, created by an all-Latino writing room as well, with a Latino director and everything else. We are completely inspired by the stories of Latino teens in the US, and particularly East LA. We created the series actually with a transmedia storytelling approach in mind. So I'd actually encourage you to check it out on Hulu. And there's actually a reel that's called the Transmedia Reel, and it really walks you through our full experience. So we have a show in season 1 that was 24 half-hour episodes, but then we also created a full world of East Los High, and had, you know, the characters that fall in love in the taqueria, and one of them is really inspired by cooking, starts a cooking show, and it's like this sexy cooking show, and them making healthy Mexican recipes. Then there's a character who falls in love with the editor of the school newspaper. Now, the editor of the school newspaper is all about kind of doing good in the world, and he's a player. You know, he's all about showing that he gets all the girls and is getting it on a lot. But to get her, he decides to start his own segment, which is, he first pitches a sports show, and then she's like, that's lame, everyone does that. And then he's like, I'm gonna do one on sex and dating. And this guy is hysterical. So what we did was actually create this blog, or this, not, it's like a journalism piece, I guess, but like 1 to 2 minutes. And they are all real questions from kids in East LA that we went out and collected. And then they're actually him being interviewed by the girl he's in love with and trying to impress, answering these questions about sex and dating in a really comedic way. And again, these questions weren't like, oh, okay, you know, so what kind of birth control should I use? It was like, why does my guy boyfriend always want to have anal sex? I mean, and we went there and we answered that question because these were the kinds of questions we were getting from our audience. Then we had, you know, a group of experts help us to answer the questions in a responsible way, and then we'd have our writers take that and put it into the character's voice and make it really engaging and fun. And then, of course, our actor, who's hysterical, brought it to life in a really incredible way. And we did that with a whole bunch of other elements, all built off the show. So things that you couldn't, you know, and I think you guys both spoke to this really well, is that, you know, there's a cadence to a drama. And you can't, certain issues kind of ask for more. But you can't always stop that cadence because, you know, you need to keep everything going and into the different characters' stories and everything else. And transmedia allows you to dive deeper into those issues, deeper into those characters, and to show the multitude of sides that an issue has, and then link them with real resources as well. So we have the kind of static resource pages. We had, you know, more than 30,000 people look for a Planned Parenthood clinic from our homepage in the first month we were on the air, and things like that. So that's just a quick rundown of what we did.
Thank you, Katie. Now, as I said in the beginning, the medical shows are 60 years old this year, beginning with Medic in 54. And two of our panels are thinking about doing a new medical show. I'm just wondering how you approach it. And actually, both of you are approaching the pharmaceutical industry in different ways. Melisa, you have a satire of the industry on RX. Could you just talk about how you're just thinking about now putting together a new medical series?
You know what, I started thinking about it when we were doing Dallas Buyers Club, because obviously you realize how insanely corrupt the pharmaceutical industry is. And then I met someone who was one of the lead salespeople at, I think it was Pfizer, and I shadowed him for a week, and I just thought, oh my God, this guy's amazing. Like, he's the most amazing salesperson, and what he does, he just really, as a patient, obviously leaves you very jaded and skeptical about going to see your doctor and taking medicine. So I thought, oh, that's such a great character to explore. And so that's what it is. It's called RX. Jim Carrey's going to be in it, so I thought he was a good, he's a good person. He's a good person to play that role because it's a very duplicitous character. He ends up getting sick, and he's, the #1 salesperson in the United States. So he's very skeptical when he goes to his doctor.
And Neal, you have also a show called Pushers that you're thinking about, maybe for streaming or a different type of distribution. So could you just talk about how you're thinking about a new series?
Well, it's just, when I was a resident, we would always get pizza lunches from the drug reps, the pushers, and they'd come with their totes, and they were always women, typically very well dressed and very tight skirts and very high heels, and they would be presenting lots of food for us. And so I was always intrigued by, and there are laws now that prevent them from giving trips to the Bahamas and other things, but there's still, if you go to the doctor's office, you'll see people coming in with the totes, the bags that they're pulling. And so I really wanted to know more about them. And so, it's a crazy, crazy business, and the training, and it's ruthless, and it's a story about sort of a woman who's been doing it for a while, who's good at it, and a young woman who was a great cheerleader in college who is on her heels. But it is about the industry, and it's, what amazes me is there's a drug that you can buy. This and also was inspired just because I'm a trustee of the Writers Guild Pension and Health Fund, and so a lot of writers were we get the lists of what drugs are being, prescribed, like a lot, like sleeping drugs and drugs for reflux. And so there's a drug, Nexium, that's really expensive, and there's a drug, Prilosec, that's really cheap because it became generic. It went off patent, so it's available over the counter at the grocery store. They're pretty much the same drug. They're mirror images. They're isomers. And so this was a way for the company to make that beautiful purple pill, and they put a lot of research into getting that color. And it's essentially the same drug. And the research shows that it works exactly the same way, but it costs, dozens of times more than the drug that went off patent. And so that really inspired me too to look into, like, how are these drugs pushed, when there are drugs over the counter that work equally as well. So that it was inspired again by real life, and asking those questions, like, why is it that doctors are prescribing these drugs so much? Well, that drug is advertised a lot on television. So it's a world that's, ready for satire, certainly, and for skewing.
Els,
yeah, maybe just to add to that, as you're saying, I mean, we know that while the first excuse or the first justification we also always hear when one challenges the high prices of medicines, it's like, oh, we need to pay for future innovation. But we know that drug companies spend at least twice as much at marketing than they do at research and development. And as you already mentioned, most of the drugs that actually they do develop and put onto the market have no added therapeutic benefits to what we already have. People have done studies, and it's like more than 80% of the new medicines that are being promoted as the best thing ever have actually no added value to what exists already. And so this whole system is so compromised, as you were saying. I mean, it's what they call the medico-industrial complex that functions very well, but that functions because we all somehow agree to pay these very high prices of medicines, and that is really what I think we need to challenge somehow and ask all the right questions.
Yeah, I mean, when I was shadowing the sales rep, he was very, very cynical and definitely only there to make money. But, so I'll just couch that with this. But then he did tell me, he said, look, if you walk into my boss's office, you will hear him being like, fuck you, I don't care if that guy has a hangnail, I want him on a statin by the time he leaves your room. And he was like, you won't believe, he's like, he said, you know, he would not believe we can look into the computer, because they have the database of who's prescribing what and what prescriptions are getting filled. He said, after we call these doctors and yell at them, that we will get a spike in prescription. So he said, we have to keep doing it. Once a month you have to do it, because then once they forget that you've called and asked them to dinner or threatened them or whatever, then it goes back down. And then, so you call up and he you know, I mean, it's obviously cynical, but.
It's just so rife with conflict because, as we say on our show, it's like you can't live with them and you can't live without them, and you really,
exactly.
you know, can't in this modern day. You know, you can, you know, we do get treated for a lot of things that, you know, but the price is high, as you're saying, in many ways. So it's really complex but fascinating and ready for TV and movies, I think.
Yeah, and the way we treat chronic disease is, I mean, a very Western approach is that you just treat the symptoms, and so you end up having this incredible expense instead of anyone in this audience who's gone to a traditional doctor knows that you don't leave with the, you know what, maybe you should stop smoking, get off your ass and walk a couple miles a day and stop eating red meat every day and, you know, eat some more vegetables. I mean, even just the simplest, most basic nutritional information or physical health information, you're not leaving the office with that. Doctors are harried, they're under tons of pressure, they're not thinking that way. And so there's that side of it too, but you're leaving with a prescription. That prescription usually will lead to another prescription, which is going to lead to another, until you're 10 prescriptions down the road and you're at the Mayo Clinic where they're like, where do you get all these things?
It's really, it's just such a, I'm not interested in the clinic at all anymore. You know, I don't have time to really practice medicine, but by the time someone comes, you know, 1 out of 9 people, 1 out of 9 Angelinos in this county has type 2 diabetes, and it costs $6.4 billion a year to treat. And it's caused by obesity and lack of exercise. And so by the time they come into a doctor's office, they've lived this life that has caused them to be overweight, hypertensive, and have type 2 diabetes. And the treatment is, you know, expensive, and a lot of people don't follow through. And so at our center, as Sandra mentioned, we look at the social determinants of health, because I think that's really where it is now, which is how do we work with, you know, young people at an early age so that they can prevent this happening to them, because we will not as a society be able to afford type 2 diabetes. It's just going to bankrupt the country no matter what kind of Obamacare we have.
And we also have in our audience a physician turned writer. I think he's worked with Neal. Has a new show coming on in May, The Night Shift on NBC. Zach Lutsky, could you just talk about how you approach the genre and how you want to do things just a little differently?
Well, first tell them, Zach, how you got your first job. Not all the details.
How I got my first script?
Yes, how you've got your first TV, script job. Yes.
Okay, so you're forgoing HIPAA.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I said not the details. I just said just the general.
So what Neal is referring to is I had worked on some shows as a medical consultant and was dying to get that first script, which for the writers in the audience know is extremely hard to get. And I had shot a pilot and was waiting to hear if it was going to get picked up, but it really wasn't a big medical show. And I'm at work one day, and I'm looking at the patients coming back, and I see the name Neal Baer. So I ran and jumped on that chart and said, that one's mine. Now, I worked on ER at the end, and so I certainly knew who Neal was, but he was many years before me. And it ended up that Neal was my patient and was very nice and said he loves to help writers. But at the time, he was on a show about cops and lawyers. And as fate would have it, within a few weeks of that meeting, he was handed a medical show and called me up and said, what do you think? I said, absolutely. And he said, don't worry, I'm going to get you your first script. And that's how it happened.
Oh,
So had I not been working that day at that very
He was
moment.
a good doctor at Cedars.
Yes. So thank you for being sick, Neal.
What was he there for? That would be HIPAA.
One quick comment in terms of the pharmaceutical, because I'm a writer, but I still work as an ER doctor, and our government has decided that part of the way that Medicare is going to compensate physicians nowadays is based on patient satisfaction.
I was trying to hold my tongue though.
It's crazy, because for years I was dealing with not giving everybody a Z-Pack because moms thought that all their kids needed them. But now my compensation is partially based on the perception of the patient, not the medical outcome, but the perception of the patient of, did I do something? Well, when you go to the ER and you wait 4 hours, how do you do something? Well, you leave with a prescription. So it's quite unfortunate, and is very expensive, and is breeding catastrophic antibiotic resistance, and is hopefully something that'll change. In regards to my new show, yes, I'm on a show called The Night Shift. Everybody tune in May 27th on NBC. It's about an ER, a night shift of an ER in San Antonio, and we try to throw some social commentary into each episode. Many of our characters are based in the military, and so we sort of touch on issues about caring for the military, returning, both in their physical ailments, you know, amputations and whatnot, and then also some of the psychiatric ailments. The lead of the show ends up having PTSD, and like so many in reality, it's completely unrecognized and comes to a head over the arc of the first season. But I think one of the best examples is actually in the pilot of sort of social commentary on how the medicine in today's world works, which is, I think it's actually, there's like a janitor character, and his daughter has not been able to get medical care or seen because she has no insurance, and has this tumor that has been growing bigger and bigger in her abdomen. And when she finally comes to see our hero night shift doctors, they want to get her the scan of her belly to see what's going on. And our adversarial hospital administrator character says, absolutely not going to happen. And so the doctors, through almost a caper, have to finagle a way to get her the scan for free. And so, you know, it starts with going to the technologist and getting him to agree to run the study. Okay, and he'll do it, but he actually has some plastic surgery that he wants done. So then you have to go over to the plastic surgeon, and the plastic surgeon, well, he wants a date with the hot new resident, et cetera, et cetera. And I've watched the pilot several times, and it sort of borders on ridiculous, but what occurred to me is what it's really commenting on is the ridiculousness of our system. And that's how things are done nowadays. And it's truer than you think, getting these things done. So anyway, everybody tune in.
Thanks, Zach. Well, we have time now for some audience questions. And who would like to ask the first question? To our panelists or to some of our special guests in the audience? Yes, Sonny Fox, right here.
A couple of things I noticed in absentia. Storylines about mental problems, which is a huge portion of the medical problems we have in this country. Do they not lend themselves to dramatization, whether it's schizophrenia or anything of that sort, or all the other panoply of medical issues that are out there? The other thing is, I haven't heard anything about drugs such as cocaine. When the Vermont governor devotes his entire annual address to the drug scores that's occupying Vermont, and you hear it from other states. Is that something that's missing, or are we just not talking about it tonight here at the? And thank you very much, by the way, for all the work you have done, are doing, and will be doing in using the power of storytelling to affect these health outcomes. We do appreciate that.
So a question about reflecting mental illness in storylines.
Zach?
I would just say, and you know, feel free to comment, that it's, because I've worked on a number of shows, and you try to do the mental storylines, but it gets tough because a lot of them fall into crazy. In other words, how do you differentiate one from the other to somebody who doesn't really know? And so it gets tough to tell many different stories when they sort of get classified into one thing. I sort of compare it, Neal and I did a show about a neurosurgeon, and there's thousands of different neurosurgeries, but to the audience watching, it was brain surgery. So how do you differentiate that to the audience who isn't educated in that? And so on the shows I've worked on, you usually do 1 or 2 mental health storylines, but it's hard to differentiate that to the audience. And I don't know if you've had a similar experience.
So based on some earlier research where we actually map all of the health content on the top 30 scripted shows according to Nielsen ratings every year, we look at the top 10 most frequently portrayed health topics in television storylines. And mental illness and addiction come second and third, just behind violence. So actually, mental illness and addiction really do lend themselves to TV dramas. There's plenty of conflict to be resolved, tons of drama. So yes, they're being portrayed.
On Grey's, we actually tried to give one of our characters bipolar disorder, and as Zach said, it was starting to venture onto crazy, and we weren't able to really tell that story in a way that we thought was responsible. So we nixed it. But since then, we have had a lot of PTSD. We have a military guy who went through something, but we also had a shooter in the hospital, and there was a lot of PTSD that we actually dealt with some of our characters from that. And just recently, we had one of our major characters have OCD, which can be very helpful for a surgeon, but also very detrimental if you can't actually get to the surgery. So we did a multi-episode arc on OCD and then her dealing with it and treating it. So, I mean, we have tried to tackle it in various ways through the seasons.
Yeah, we did it, just a plethora of stories. One of the first to do bipolar disorder was Sally Field's character on ER, and looking at the comorbidity with alcoholism, so that she was an alcoholic and then she was bipolar, and Sally was just really terrific in that. And I think that what's happened is that there's been a lot of criticism from NAMI, an organization that represents, people with mental disabilities, and rightfully that all schizophrenics do not murder and are crazy, and very few do, very, very few, but that, of course, as Zach was kind of alluding to, causes the drama. So I think shows have been, I think, better at not doing that. But, we've tried to explore really, sort of complex issues like, especially on SVU, lent itself really well to that. So looking at, kids who are psychopaths, and are they treatable? And that's a huge debate raging amongst psychiatrists, and looking at the effects of antidepressants on children and ADHD in children, and you name the topic, and SVU did it, which was a great thing about SVU. But I think it's really incumbent on us not to demonize mental illness as something that's violence, because that's really pretty rare, and so that's been a big change. And then in terms of drug abuse, I mean, ER was the first show because of NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse. They came to us and said, will you do one thing? And this was in the mid-90s. They said, will you just say that addiction is a brain disease? Because it really hadn't been discussed that way before. So we said addiction is a brain disease, and we had Noah Wiley's character become an addict on the show and cover it up. And then we were able to say addiction is a brain disease, which really has now kind of found its place in the way that people look at addiction. But it used to be seen as, poor character, character defect, you just weren't strong enough, you had the choice. And now we know genetically and through lots of research that that's not the case. And so I think television has been in the forefront to push that, but always we can do better.
Els?
Yeah, I think it's a great example where your new show on the drug pushing could be very useful, because I think all the mental health medicines are the most overprescribed, overpushed medicines, that there is so much overuse of those because we don't really understand how it all works, and kind of getting a much more balanced view about how one can deal with mental illness, that it's not just pushing chemicals through people's throats, including kids, etc. I think that you have a great topic there.
The question back there, yes.
Thank you so much. Lorene Arbus is my name, and I am so proud to be a trustee at Paley Center just for evenings like this. It more than makes it a wonderful opportunity that I have. So the largest minority of people in this country are people with disability. Less than 1% of all portrayals on all primetime television are of people with disability. And even more alarmingly and frustratingly is the fact that actors with disability who do qualify, and there are over 3,000 now listed and accessible with their talents to everyone who produces and directs, are seldom called in for auditions. So without meaning to be on a soapbox, but I think this is so important, an issue that media really does not, and if of any area, of course, in Media RX, we should be seeing people with disability who have all manner of illnesses and diseases as well. But just the issue of disability is, how does a woman get a mammogram who can't stand up in that idiotic machine that we have to go through? You know, how does somebody with disability get on an examining table? I mean, the whole medical profession is inimical to people with disability. I would love to hear your thoughts. What have you been doing? Would you consider doing more in this area? And I thank you.
Well, again, we did it on ER with Laura Innes's character, and she had her cane, she had her crutch. She didn't talk about it till the end, I think, about how that happened, but she worked. It was interesting in the very beginning of the show, we made Gloria Rubin's character HIV positive. That was seen as a disability, and then we really tried to fight that. And she, to my knowledge, is the only primetime character ever with HIV, which speaks volumes about HIV in this country still, because there are no primetime characters that I know of that are leads, that are leading characters with HIV. But it's true, you know, I think there's it's just what you said, that you have to just keep pounding away, talking about it, and especially with actors with disabilities, because there are lots of actors out there, and we tend not to use them. I think that, you know, probably, I'm not sure why, if it's out of fear or just not having, you know, the knowledge, the ignorance about it, but it's worth certainly talking about, obviously, and doing more. But we do, you know, because it was a medical series, we did think about it, and we would have an episode about it. But to have a character is, you know, something that we should strive for.
Well, in Grey's, we now have a person who lost her leg. We unfortunately could not hire a disabled actress for that because the actress already existed. So she lost her leg in a plane crash, or after a plane crash, and the drama came from her partner, her wife, having to actually make the call to cut off her leg, or to save her life. So she lives with a disability, and I think the actress often forgets she has a disability, but unlike Laura Innes, who really played it up, but we do address it. We do make it as a major storyline. And we also just recently had a lot of, because of that, actually, one of the orthopedists is trying to do a lot of work with like the brain, and there's all this new technology with the brain moving the arm and that sort of thing. And we actually took this great field trip to, it's the Center for Neurological Diseases it's for rehab. I can't remember the exact name of it. Rancho, yes. We went out there and talked to some people. We talked to the researchers that were actually doing the research, and a guy who was a quadriplegic showed us how he was working with his disability and how he was working with the researchers. And for one of the various patients was actually an entire episode of one of the Rancho counselors who was also a quadriplegic or paraplegic. And so when we have it available, we do try to actually employ those people because it's obviously going to tell the better story and it's going to show it in a better way. So whenever possible, I don't know if you'd consider deafness disability, but we just had a storyline with that and had a deaf lady and a hearing person, and that was the story, is that, you know, she was speaking for her deaf daughter, and then the husband was hearing and could also sign. So whenever possible, we do try to get an actual disabled person, and I believe private practice had a doctor that was wheelchair bound, that was actually wheelchair bound. I don't know that much about that, but I know that they had the specialized chair, and it was very exciting to see how the chair worked and everything. But I know that we try as much as possible. Linda Lowy, the casting director.
Well, we have one final question from Twitter, and it approaches medical shows from a different angle. How can we use TV to influence a student's choice of a specialty? Can media help the psychiatrist MD shortage? So have you thought about influencing and helping to create new doctors through your series?
Well, ER did increase the number of, Zach went into emergency medicine because he watched ER. Case in point. Case in point. But it did actually increase the numbers of applicants to emergency medicine. And I think just, it doesn't have to be a medical series, but it can be showing, you know, a psychiatrist or primary care particularly, like it's like a good thing to do. You don't necessarily have to be a specialist, or you can be a pediatrician or an internist or a family practice, family medicine or psychiatry, and have a very rewarding career. And that could be on a soap opera or a comedy or anything. So it's not just like a medical series, but we've been talking a lot about that at our center, like how do you just make it something that seems to be the norm? And I think that has a very positive impact. There was a really interesting study from someone who worked at the World Bank, who's now at the New America Foundation, and he found that women in Afghanistan, for instance, who watched television, American television, were more likely to work and have fewer kids. And it's because American television has women who work and they don't have huge families. And so the norm really changed, and it has a huge impact. So it doesn't just have to be a specific kind of show, it can be any kind of show that can start to change norms.
And I don't know how many surgeons Grey's has inspired, but I know that it's inspired a lot of women. A lot of teenagers will approach us all the time, or approach me all the time and say, like, I'm going to be a doctor because of Grey's. So that's cool. That's very exciting.
Well, I think that we've learned tonight that the medical shows are in really good health, and you guys have been creating storylines that are really challenging viewers and making them want to learn more and take action. So I want to thank you for coming, and thank you for your programs, and thank you, the audience, too. You've been so good.
Thank you. Thank you.